Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Gilda Hilaire, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager focused on Trailblazer programs. Today, we are going to have a live discussion on SMS featuring Kevin Ryan, Product Manager for SMS. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We will try to address these during the presentation and at the end. And now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Kevin.
All right, thank you, Gilda. Hey, everyone. I am Kevin Ryan. I'm a product manager here. I've been with Salesforce for about 5 years. I own our SMS product, which is Mobile Connect, the Journey Builder SMS activity, and then the subsequent SMS APIs. And so without further ado, let's dive in. As with kind of every Salesforce presentation, you folks are probably used to seeing the safe harbor statement. What this generally says is please only make purchase decisions based on existing product functionality. So this is me. I'm Kevin Ryan, and then I'm joined by my co-host here, my dog, Evie. Moving on, agenda-wise, today we'll go through a super brief overview of the applications. We'll probably skip kind of the just general introduction and just make some assumptions that most of the folks here have at least seen the applications and know what they are. We'll go super deep into subscriptions, outbound and inbound SMS, cover delivery receipts and kind of how they work in the SMS ecosystem, a brief stint into tokenized sending and some gotchas there, a roadmap discussion, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Based off the webinar registrations, we know you guys have a lot of questions. Some of them were kind of straightforward, simple ones, like how's the blackout window work? And other ones are super detailed in terms of how to actually link some of the tables in our data views, and then also managing subscriptions from other clouds. So I will try to get through all these today, at least in the presentation, and then just hit some on Q&A afterwards. So let's start with the SMS landscape. So there's 3 major components to the SMS business within Marketing Cloud. That's Mobile Connect, which is our channel application. That is for sending and receiving SMS messages, opt-in management, and it also is the best place to run complex conversational use cases. The next is Journey Builder, and so this is our outbound SMS journey orchestration. It's best used for low to mid volume transactional sending and also omni-channel use cases that involve SMS. Journey Builder and Mobile Connect are 2 separate applications under the hood. They share some table structure, but they are 2 different apps at the end of the day. Specifically in that content used in Mobile Connect lives within Mobile Connect, and content used within Journey Builder is all coming out of Content Builder as of January 2019. And last but not least is our SMS APIs. These are best used for high volume transactional messaging and also web-based subscription management. We have actually a pretty heavy amount of APIs, but the primary ones are Message Contact, the transactional API for SMS, and then QMO to actually go ahead and manage those subscriptions. So in order to actually have a discussion about SMS, there is some just kind of high level stuff that needs to be understood, and also some level setting some terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation today. The first is the actual value chain in sending text messages. As you can see on the slide here, all of them start with a marketer. And then actually, Marketing Cloud, so this is where our applications sit. Marketing Cloud sends all messages over to tier 1 aggregators. So depending on where you're trying to send a message in the world, we may have different aggregator partners, and we use who's ever best in a particular market. The reason that we use those tier 1 aggregators is because they are responsible for maintaining and connecting to tier 1 carriers across the globe. And so this is, the AT&Ts, T-Mobiles, Verizons of the world, and then subsequently all the tier 2 and 3 carriers that might live underneath them. And then obviously the last step is the audience, and for the inbound chain, it's just the absolute reverse of that. Starts with the audience and ends back at the marketer. So 2 terms I'll be using a lot are MO and MT. MT stands for mobile terminated message. This is a message that you deploy to an end user, and MO is the opposite. That is a message an end user sends into Marketing Cloud and therefore back to the marketer. So that's what I'm referring to when I say either MOs or MTs. So one of the questions that we got was around mobile code acquisition and kind of why it takes so long and some of the challenges there. And so the reason that is actually because in many markets, the carrier actually requires review manually of each individual use case that's stood up. And so this is particularly for the US and Canada, but does happen internationally somewhere as well. We have something called a CAF form. which is actually required for the submission of a marketing campaign for running on A2P SMS, as well as the T&C's page setup. So the carriers will actually go ahead, a human being will review that CAF form, and they'll actually test out your stop, your help keywords to make sure that your program's compliant. The aggregator will typically actually review those forms when they're submitted in order to make sure that what is submitted to carriers doesn't get rejected. And then the carriers tend to take their time when they're actually going ahead and doing revisions. And that's actually where that lead time comes in terms of how long it takes to actually go ahead and acquire a code. Now, moving on to the international side, it is a much quicker process, and primarily just because there's significantly less amount of restrictions when you're sending outside of the US and Canada. The longest part of the standing up a new code in order for sending here is typically actually the terms and conditions page setup, because that's still required in virtually every market around the world. And then it usually just takes 1 to 2 weeks for code acquisition, and occasionally for from name registration, which is something that occurs in a couple particular markets. If you're sending into to Turkey or into Russia, it is actually required that that we register the from name you're going to be sending on with those governments. That can typically take 1 to 2 weeks, depending on how busy a carrier is at any given moment. All right, let's talk about SMS subscriptions. This is something that we get a ton of questions about, not only for why are they required, but also how do they actually work under the hood. So I'm going to go pretty deep into the way that these actually function. So there are 3 things that are required to send SMS in Marketing Cloud, and that's subscriber key, mobile number, and locale, or the country code itself. So the locale is inferred if you're actually using the contacts model, but if you want to use something like a data extension as your send list, it is absolutely required that you have locale. And the locales in those DEs actually have to be the 5-character alphanumeric locales. So for the US, that would be EN-US, which is US English. And then for getting contacts into Mobile Connect, there are a bevy of different ways you can do it. The most common one is obviously would be imports, and or an actual keyword, an organic subscription. We do support opting in folks via API though. That's particularly used on the QMO API. What that API does is actually take a mobile number that you provide and or a contact key, and it will simulate that end user texting an MO into our system. And then of course, the 4th way is you can manually add contacts and edit subscriptions via the UI itself. So out of the box, we support 3 different types of opt-in, which would be single, double, and age verification. Single opt-in is just what it sounds like. An end user will send in an MO. They will immediately be subscribed, and a response message will be kicked back to that end user. Double opt-in is probably the most commonly used ones. It's only available on 2A-enabled codes, but it actually will, same process, end user text and join. They are then returned a response message that says reply what yes or y to confirm. That's configurable by the marketer. And then once the end user actually responds with that y or yes confirmation, we'll go ahead and create the subscription for them. And the third and very rarely used one is age validation. This is typically used in instances where a customer is promoting a product that might require some sort of age verification. But this will actually ask a user for their birth date or how old they are, and validate whether the subscription is valid based on that end user's actual response there. So under the hood, and this is something that we get asked about all the time, it is what actually determines whether an end user is opted in or not. And so we store subscriptions in something called mobile address internally within Marketing Cloud. And there's 3 different statuses you do need to know about. The first is the mobile address status. This is kind of the overall status for an entire contact that's active, inactive, or deleted. An active contact is really any contact that you import. So long as you don't import them as an active, they will be an active contact. If someone were to call up your business and say, I never want to receive messages from you ever again, if you were to re-import that contact as an active, that will essentially blacklist that contact entirely from receiving any SMS messages, regardless of how you try and send them. And then the third one is deleted, and that is part of the contacts delete process. It's a status customer will be placed in when they're in the soft delete window, and then also once they've actually been hard deleted out of the system. The next is opt-in status ID. This is what actually governs whether someone is opted in or not. So for a generic contact you might import with no SMS references, will actually have a status of not opted in or 0. Opt-in pending is what occurs during a double opt-in. If a user has texted and joined but never actually completed that opt-in by responding to that response message with a Y or a yes, they'll actually be left in a pending status. And then the third, of course, is opted in, which is a status of 2. On the flip side, for unsubscribes, we run a very similar process where we have not opted out as a 0, and then opted out or the 2 deleting statuses that a customer will go through as part of their contacts delete process. All right, let's take a look real quick just at how organic opt-ins work. When I say organic, I mean an actual end user texting a keyword into a shortcode. And so everything starts with the end user. They'll text in a join keyword. We will perform a contacts lookup. If the contact exists, we'll flip that status on that end user over to 2 and then kick them out that empty response. If they do not exist in the system, we will actually create a net new contact with a subscriber key of mobile number. The reason that we actually have to go ahead and do this is just due to the way that the SMS send protocol works. The only thing we know about a mobile number that has texted into a keyword is the mobile number at that time, right? There's no other metadata that's associated with that inbound join. So we will, for organic opt-ins, we'll actually be creating mobile numbers with contact keys of mobile number in order to actually return them a message out of our system. The one way to work around this is if you are, you have a pre-existing data model and you don't want to kind of muddy your data model with contact keys that are not whatever you happen to have been using, whether that's email address or Salesforce ID. You can run all of your opt-ins through a web portal, and that QMO API will actually allow you to designate what the contact key is on a per contact basis during the actual subscription process. And that is, at least right now, the best way to kind of not pollute your data with any new sort of contact keys that any external systems you use might not recognize. And more on that later, because we actually have been working on a solution to resolve that problem. For double opt-ins, it's more or less the same process, just with the one extra step here, and that is, end user join. We do the same contacts lookup, and then they'll actually get moved over to the acceptance response keyword off this empty response. This is where an end user will respond with a Y or a yes. We'll look and see if that's actually valid or not, and then from there either set that opt-in status to 2, or we'll leave them with an opt-in status of pending or 1. So some subscriptions considerations that you do need to know about. This is super important, but always indicate message frequency as part of that opt-in response message. The carriers typically like to see this as part of any sort of CAF process. But even if you are sitting in a market that doesn't require a CAF form submission, this is still something that's more or less expected by your end users, right? They want to know upfront how often you plan to be communicating with them, primarily when you're running marketing use cases. Obviously for transactional, the customer typically is initiating the process that's going to send them the message, so they're expecting it to come, expecting it to show up on their handset. However, it is super important that when you can, do indicate roughly how often an end user will receive a message from you. The second one is what I covered above, and that is the fact that during an organic opt-in, we actually will be setting the contact key as the mobile number. And just real quick, if I can, I'm gonna actually stop that little icon from bouncing here. Nah, can't get it up right now, so we'll just keep rolling through. The third thing is Mobile Connect will consider users who have a status of opt-in pending to be unsubscribed, right? They have never actually completed that opt-in. We leave them in pending status intentionally so that a segment can be created for folks who might have a status of opt-in pending so that they can be retargeted on a different channel. All right, subscriptions. Another question we get is, how do subscriptions actually work, right? How does a subscription relate to both a keyword and to a code? And so they actually live at both levels. The hierarchy is that all customers are subscribed at a code level first, and then to keywords underneath that. So a few things to note is that at least one opted-in subscription is required to send a user an outbound message. The reason you're allowed to subscribe users to multiple keywords on the same code is to really assist with segmentation, right? If you're running multiple campaigns from the same short code or long code, actually opting users into different keywords allows you to very easily segment those users to send them different messages about different topics. It also kind of it lets you manage your subscriptions a little bit better, especially if you have different sources for opting folks in. If you create one keyword that is handling your API-based opt-ins versus another keyword that's handling your organics, you can actually measure your growth very easily. For how fast your subscriber list is growing based on the actual source of that individual opt-in. And then the last but not least is that a subscription is actually not required for text response messages. The act of an end user actually sending a message into the platform is a direct request for data. So those text responders that you were able to set up in Mobile Connect will work regardless if a subscription exists for an end user or not. All right, opting out, most important part of every use case, and I don't say that in a jesting way. For SMS is super heavily regulated, so it's critical that end users have a valid opt-out path. Otherwise, the penalties can get pretty severe depending on what part of the world you happen to be sending into. In the US and Canada, it's actually a requirement that folks can opt out via an organic MO. That's typically a stop keyword. And then for international sending, end users are just required to have a valid opt-out path. A lot of international codes are one-way only, so there's actually no way for end users to respond to messages that are coming from those codes. Because of that, it is, it's actually critical that you do provide end users with a way to opt out. And so I do have the most common four opt-out methods here. The first and most often used are global stop keywords. These are stop, quit, end, cancel, and unsubscribe. If an end user texts in one of these keywords, regardless of whether or not you've set it up within the UI, we will globally opt them out from every keyword on that shortcode that they have an active subscription to. So you can configure the message that's returned to an end user when they do text in one of the global stop keywords. And that's done by actually creating that keyword within the UI. However, even if you don't, we will still consider that valid opt-out requests, regardless if you've configured it or not. Second would be custom stop keywords. These work the same way that global stop keywords do, although we'll opt users out of an individual keyword itself. However, it will opt them out of the entire code as well, right? So even though you will only be opting them out of a single keyword, at a code level, they will be opted out and unavailable to receive any outbound messages from that code until they resubscribe. And then the other two are very related, and that's a web-based opt-out and a hyperlink opt-out. Both of those will actually utilize that QMO API in order to take that end user's mobile number, and it will essentially send in a mock MO or fake MO on behalf of that end user, and therefore opt them out within our system. So process flow for how opt-outs actually work. Pretty much as simple as it sounds. If we get a stop request, and the example here is assuming that this is a global unsubscribe, this will actually go ahead and opt a user out of both the code and the keyword. If this was a custom stop request, they'd actually only be unsubscribed from one individual keyword, but that would also opt them out from the code itself. In the past, if we go back about 7 years ago, we did used to allow for individual unsubscribes from any given keyword via custom stop, and it's something we're examining at reintroducing back into the platform. If that's something that you would be interested in, please reach out to either your account executive or the team that manages your partner relationship and have them create a voice of the customer record. Just because it is something that we're considering doing, but just we've had customers in the past that ran into some challenges around that, which is why we pulled it about 5 years ago. All right, outbound SMS. So under the hood here, there's kind of four major components to when we send an SMS message. And just real quick, I'm gonna go ahead and there we go. Stop that guy from bouncing there. So that is the messaging application. In that case, that would be Mobile Connect, Journey Builder, or one of the sending APIs. The send engine itself, the aggregator and the carrier, messaging apps where content, message, configuration, and keyword management all occurs. And then the send engine, and this is what some of our end users consider a little bit of a black box, is where a lot of the actual magic happens. So a lot of things occur here. First and foremost is number validation. This is where we actually will take any number that you've imported into the system, and first we'll normalize it, meaning that we strip any of the spaces or special characters, dashes, hyphens, you name it. We'll strip all that off just to give us a raw number string, and then we'll actually go through the AMP script rendering itself. And so any AMP script that happens to be in the message body will execute at that call. Any personalization strings will be replaced with the text values that represent that piece of personalization. We'll then go through subscription validation, and that is actually checking to make sure there's a valid subscription for that end user. And the last but not least is the message deployment. That's the send engine actually kicking the send over to the aggregator. One thing to note on that number validation bit, the way that actually works as well is we do validate the number format against the locale that you happen to be sending into. For instance, if you're sending in the US, our number validation tool within our app knows what a valid US format is for a phone number. If a phone number doesn't meet that format, that send will actually be thrown out. And so record will never even be inserted into the process. We do that to avoid charging you for messages that we know absolutely will not get delivered to an end user. But that does oftentimes result in some cases or some confusion on the customer end, because if you deploy a list to a list of 100,000 people and you haven't prescribed those numbers, oftentimes there will be some dirty data in there, and that's often why end users will see, hey, I might have sent to a list of 100,000, but I only see that 98,000 messages were actually deployed here. The most often case that we see that's the cause of that is the fact that there's a bad mobile number and the send engine actually threw it out and never attempted it. On the aggregator route, like I explained earlier, we use the aggregator to connect to different carriers. They maintain those carrier relationships, so we don't have to maintain 100,000 different integrations with carriers across the globe. And then they also are a DLR provider. I will get very deep into DLRs later in the presentation here. Lastly, the carrier, who's responsible for that last leg of message delivery, and then also providing us with a delivery receipt to indicate whether delivery was successful or unsuccessful. All right, a little bit deeper inside the send engine. As I explained, number validation. So this is us doing that normalization process where we'll strip off any special characters or spaces, and then that format check. AMP script rendering, like I explained earlier, that is where we'll actually go ahead and execute all of those different AMP script calls or any HTTP posts or GET calls that might be located in that message body. The subscription validation, just so that we ensure that you're not sending to any end users who are unsubscribed. And then the deployment of that message. All right, on the flip side, let's get deep into inbound here. So some need to knows here. Marketing Cloud processes keywords on something called first instance processing. This means that we'll take the first noun in a text string, so that is any set of characters separated by space, and consider that the actual keyword that we are trying to process on an inbound message. This means that in the instance someone's actually trying to unsubscribe, if they text in "please stop messaging me," we will see, or the system will see, "please" as the keyword that they're actually trying to interact with, and they will get kicked the default response from the default responder. So it's super important to know that you're clear in your messaging to end users on what to actually respond with in order to continue down your message chain, specifically in two-way use cases. And so the first thing that happens when we actually get an inbound message is we check it against what's called the global stop processor, and then followed by the custom stop processor. This way we ensure that subscriptions and then also the wishes of the end user are the first thing that are respected. So before we do any other sort of logic, the first thing that always happens is we check, is this message an indication that an end user wants to be unsubscribed? And then all unrecognized keywords are actually handled by something called the default keyword processor. For folks familiar with Mobile Connect, you'll know that if the account that you happen to be working in owns a code, because the way codes live is there's actually a Marketing Cloud ID, or in layman's terms, a business unit that owns that code. In the text response template, there is actually the ability to create what's called a default keyword response. What this is the response that's kicked out to any end user who sends in an MO that the system's not able to recognize. And what this looks like, at least in terms of a kind of simple process flow, is we'll get an MO from an end user. We'll route that MO to that code owning mid. So if anyone happens to be using a shared code in this instance, it will go over to the shared code mid first, which is almost always a Salesforce owned account within Marketing Cloud. It'll then be routed down to the keyword owner. Unlike shortcodes, keywords actually live at a business unit level. So that's how that routing occurs successfully. We'll check for, is it a global stop? Is it a custom stop? Is the keyword valid, right? Does that keyword exist somewhere in that mid that this message is now on? Is it a join keyword? And then finally, is it a next keyword? Next keyword is probably something we'll have to follow up in it honestly needs its own session. But what that feature is, it allows you to actually chain together complex messages, and also allows you to handle complex responses as if you're trying to do something like capture an end user's email address. Just because that email address isn't a keyword itself, you'd be able to create in the system. But more on that later. All right, delivery receipts. And this has been honestly the biggest topic probably around the last year and a half, at least that I've seen from the product side, and also from talking directly to customers. And its customers want to know, what happened to my message after it left your platform? And so before we get into that and kind of what we've done to address this issue, there's a couple of things you have to know about delivery receipts. First and foremost, DLRs or delivery receipts, that's the mechanism by which SMS delivery is determined. That's an industry standard. It works the same way regardless of whether you use us or any other SMS provider. The UI in Marketing Cloud will consider a message delivered until we get an explicit undelivered event. That means that if you kick off a send of 1 million messages, while those are en route, our UI will consider them delivered. DLRs are also created by both the aggregator and the carrier. So aggregator DLRs indicate a message was successfully received, and I forgot to change that, successfully received from Salesforce Marketing Cloud and passed to the carrier. Those are typically the en route statuses that you'll see when either running the data view and or as of the 227 release, the deliveries route will have standardized DRs within them. And then the important ones, which are the carrier DLRs. These come in two flavors: the handset DLRs, which are the ones you want; those are the good ones. And that's actual confirmation from the handset that the message has been received by it. And the second one is a network DLR, and that's acknowledgement from the carrier that the message was received. However, that is not acknowledgement that from the handset itself that a message actually made it there. So some countries do have network DLRs as the only way to actually have delivery receipts returned. And in that case, we can get false positives in that the carrier will indicate to us that, yes, this message was received, when in fact the handset did not actually get it. And where that occurs, it's a limitation of the infrastructure for SMS sending within that country. And so that's an issue that lives down at the carrier level. Another thing to note is that delivery receipts can take up to 72 hours to be passed back from the carriers. This is important to know only because, as I stated earlier, right, our UI will consider a message delivered until we get an explicit undelivered event. You may see those stats change day over day for about 3 days. It's pretty insignificant in terms of the overall numbers. However, carriers can be latent in actually passing those back. So if you check your send stats 2 days after a send is actually deployed, you may see a slightly lower delivery or even slightly higher delivery percentage than you saw initially when checking on day one. And that's just because some carriers, specifically tier 3 carriers that sit below the tier 1s in market, can take a while to actually pass those delivery receipts back. Delivery receipts are not read receipts. So these are not read receipts. They do not have a timestamp on them that would actually show when that message was opened on the end user's handset. They are just confirmation that a message was received. Those read receipts are not available industry-wide for SMS. It's just a limitation of the channel itself. And then last but not least is that DLRs may not be returned in chronological order. I bring that up specifically to talk through this slide here. As of the April release, we now have the full suite of what we're calling standardized delivery receipts available within the _SMS message tracking data view. And so this data view actually provides you the most up-to-date delivery receipt that we've received for each individual message that actually left your platform. And I bring up the chronological order because of the fact that if we often do receive delivery receipts out of order, a lot of times we'll get the en route delivery receipt after we've actually gotten the delivered one. Is that when you're actually interpreting DRs for any individual number that might have been sent to, it's best to interpret them with the highest numerical status as the most recent delivery receipt that's actually been received. For the data view, it updates with the most recent one for something that we're introducing in the upcoming release, which is these standardized DLRs located within the message contact deliveries API. You'll actually get the delivery receipts exposed in the order that we're receiving from the carrier. So it's important that if you're using that to power a third-party system, to build in the logic to actually use the status that has the highest numerical value as that most recent status. And more on that later. I do have a slide that shows what that changes entails. However, a typical send flow you'll actually get will be, you'll never catch these ones actually occurring just because you literally could not run the data view fast enough in order to actually see any of these ones. But you'll typically get delivered to aggregator, you'll get en route, you'll get accepted by carrier, and then you'll end up with either delivered, undeliverable, expired, deleted, or rejected. The delivered, undeliverable, and expired are the most common ones that you will see. We do know that folks in market want to have kind of the most detailed status as possible. A lot of times the carriers simply just don't provide those. What we're actually doing here is taking a large subset of DLRs that we could get back from the carriers and kind of translating those things and translating those into statuses that make sense to end users and marketers and developers alike. Expired is the one I get the most questions about currently. Expired statuses are most commonly surfaced when either a handset is out of range. So let's say you're sitting in Germany and that handset happens to be in France at the time. That carrier will actually retry a message for up to 7 days. It varies by carrier to carrier, and they don't publicly expose what those retry processes are. But typically there's a 7-day max on them. If that message has exhausted that carrier retry process, that expired receipt will be returned. The other instance where this happens pretty commonly is when a handset is off for an extended period of time and a message could not be delivered. You'll actually end up receiving an expired receipt. We do oftentimes see expired receipts come in, and then a day later we might actually get a delivered DLR come back for that same mobile number. All right, next would be tokenized sending. So some need to knows here. A lot of folks don't know what it is, specifically if you work outside of the the FinServ or the healthcare markets. But we do offer tokenized sending, and this allows you to actually use API-based sending to never store data within Marketing Cloud. So if you're sending any sort of personally identifiable information you wouldn't want Marketing Cloud to have, whether that be something involving social security number, bank account, you name it. This process actually lets you send outbound messages without ever actually having to store data in Marketing Cloud. This is done by something we call the Get Token API. That's an API that the customer will implement on their end. And if their account is enabled for tokenized sending, when a message actually comes in, as soon as we receive it, we'll call that Get Token API, swap out their mobile number with a token, and a token is the only thing that's actually stored within our system, and we'll use that for sending. And so one of the big reasons I bring this up is, one, I guess this is how it functions, right? So we get an MO in, that MO is routed to the code owner. As soon as that code owner is found, we actually initiate that Get Token call, and then the process is exactly the same. Where a lot of customers run into some pretty severe issues is when they're trying to stand up two-way use cases via tokenized sending. If you do comb through our documentation, we do have a specific page that relates to use cases we don't support for tokenized sending, which unfortunately is most of the two-way ones right now. And that is because of this process right here. Oftentimes, customers will want to have a single tokenized business unit under their enterprise, and or their enterprise will be tokenized, but some of the business units underneath it will not be. Because we're swapping out that mobile number for the token, as soon as we hit that code owning bid, if all of the accounts underneath that enterprise account are tokenized or are not tokenized, basically there's a mismatch between the enterprise and the business unit. We now have a mismatch in our system where we're working with a token and the business unit is expecting a mobile number. That causes that actual inbound processing to fail. So it's an issue that we're actually in the process of addressing right now. I'm trying to build a workaround for it internally, but because of that, we do not support most two-way use cases for tokenized sending today. All right, with that being said, let me make sure we're good on time. We are. Let's talk through some roadmap. So we'll revert back to the safe harbor here. With the entire COVID situation, a lot of things have been delayed just because, like all companies, Salesforce was impacted by it and having to kind of adjust to the new normal. That being said, though, still happy to run you through kind of what's come this year and then also what's still on the way. So earlier this year, as I stated, it was getting the delivery receipts into the data views. That's now been delivered and is in production for everyone. Coming in the June release, we are still looking to launch list-based sends for Journey Builder. So a lot of folks, if you follow us release over release, will see that single sends came for email in Journey Builder. Historically, Journey Builder has been a singleton send engine. Because of that, it did not handle batch and blast use cases very well. We are introducing batching into Journey Builder, and it may not be June, but we will be introducing single sends out of JB in an upcoming release. And then the other one is actually building an inbound entry source in Journey Builder specifically for SMS. We do have a lot of customers running use cases where they're using AMP script in an outbound message to insert end users into a journey. This will eliminate the need for that AMP script by actually having a dedicated entry source so that if an end user texts into your shortcode, you can not only subscribe them to that shortcode, but also directly insert them into a journey for kind of an omnichannel use case or an SMS use case that's run solely out of Journey Builder. Moving forward, in a previous release, we actually introduced the concept of expiration, and that is previously if you go back about 2 years ago, our blackout window would prevent end users from scheduling a message at any given time. However, if you kicked off a send to a million people, that will take a significant amount of time to actually get out the door. And so if you schedule to send at 8:59 with a 9 p.m. blackout window, that blackout window wouldn't actually stop those messages from deploying. With the expiration feature that's located on the administration screen with Mobile Connect, we do actually expire those messages in the queue as soon as that blackout window is respected. This feature here is actually a more granular version of that, and that would actually allow you to designate a timer per message to essentially put a auto kill feature on messages going out the door. So if you're running a use case like something like two-factor authentication, you might only have a token that's valid for 10 minutes. So you'd set a 10-minute expiration on the message. If that message hadn't actually reached that end user's handset in the given time frame, it would self-expire in the queue and never deliver. which is super important just specifically for use cases like that. If that message is no longer timely or the information is no longer valid, it's better to not interact with that end user, only because it will already upset them more than they are because they've waited 10 minutes to receive a message that it would have been to actually deliver it. Additionally, and I'll actually show you this on my next slide here, we are looking to allow customers to set contact keys for organic opt-ins. I have a couple of UI mockups on that, so I'll talk through that next. And then last but not least, as I already mentioned, supporting batching for list-based sends in Journey Builder, just so that Journey Builder can send at similar send speeds that the channel app can when you're actually trying to batch and blast to 250, 500,000 contacts. Moving on to October, this is one I'm doing a lot of discovery for right now, and that is we calling it undelivered SMS DE template. What the idea is here is essentially to provide a templated data extension that would act as a log for sends that are unattempted. As I mentioned earlier, if your mobile number format is invalid for the country you're trying to send into, we'll actually go ahead and throw that out. We never attempt it. It's not surfaced anywhere right now. So what we're trying to build is essentially a catch-all log for all unattempted and also undelivered sends with enough information on them. One, exposing what error occurred and why someone wasn't attempted to send, so we explain what happened. But then two, giving you enough information, particularly the contact key, so that that list can then be used for something like retargeting on different channels such as email or push. Additionally, we're looking at support for full support for two-way tokenized sending for use cases. And then also, and this one will likely get bumped to later in the year, just due to some other projects that the team's working on, but allow for full two-way messaging in Journey Builder via the wait until activity. Anyone familiar with Journey Builder will know that one of the flow controls is wait until. Right now, wait until only operates on a time bound, right? So you essentially wait until a specific time. We are looking to expand that flow control to be able to wait until one API event, but more importantly for SMS specifically, is to wait until an MO keyword response. And so given that, all of a sudden, you can now run full-fledged two-way use cases in Journey Builder and also very easily do omni-channel use cases. So yeah, anyone has any additional questions on that, I'm happy to walk through that in a bit deeper detail in the different session. And last but not least is the big one. And this is what we're calling dynamic link tracking or smart links. And so what we will be doing here is allow for the deployment of unique trackable links in each individual SMS message that goes out. And this would allow you as marketers to actually know that John Doe clicked link X and message Y at this time on this date. So it would be an exact way to actually go ahead and measure ROI for your SMS messages. And more importantly than that, it actually also is a stepping stone to kind of super advanced use cases in terms of the SMS world. Because the link engagement for SMS is so high, and as an example, email links are clicked about 4 to 6% of the time, where for marketing text messaging, they're clicked about 36% of the time, and transactional, they almost always are, so long as the message is something pertinent the end user wants. That gives us enough data to feed Einstein to actually have a actual win metric for SMS, and will allow us to use things like path optimization, A/B testing, and then eventually natural language processing for SMS messages. So very exciting feature, something that we're scoping out right now, but something that remains in discovery and would be January the earliest. I would imagine it will come after that, depending on how long the COVID situation goes on for. So as promised, these are some mock-ups we have for contact key setting. You'll see this is done within the Journey Builder UI. That's just because of the way that we design things nowadays. We typically always use what we call SLDS, which is our design components for Journey Builder. When we stand this up, it will be for both Journey Builder and the channel app. But the general concept here is that if you, the marketer, can provide us with a data extension that contains the contact key and then a lookup value, at the time of organic subscription, we can actually go ahead and figure out what contact key needs to be appended to that end user, even though they subscribed organically and we only know their mobile number. So the difference between the two settings here would be use mobile number. This is essentially replacing the single opt-in flow because when that end user subscribes, we already know what their mobile number is based off of that inbound MO. We would go ahead and take a look in that DE that you would be providing to us and do a lookup on the contact key associated with the given mobile number. Use cases this would fulfill is, if you have a customer that's been sitting on their data model for 3 years and has been collecting mobile numbers, you can go ahead and place that subscriber list into the templated data extension we'll be providing, and we'll go ahead and perform that lookup. The second one is an augmentation of the double opt-in flow. And so the difference here is instead of actually expecting a confirmation response, so that's when that end user responds with yes or Y, we'd actually allow for a free-form field. So in your initial response to a customer, you'd want to indicate to them, hey, please respond with your email address, or please respond with your last 4 digits of your policy number, whatever you might want it to be, and we'll actually use that piece of data that the end user provides as during that second MO to perform that lookup. And so naturally, as soon as we introduce that kind of functionality, we are introducing the possibility for human error. So we will have some fallback settings as part of this. First is default contact to mobile number. This would be that, okay, so this end user didn't properly complete this, and or no value could be found in the DE that was provided, but we still want to have them subscribed and still want to be able to message them. So create them as a contact with their contact key and mobile number. The other one would be fail contact and return error. And this would be don't create a contact. I don't want to pollute my data model. Return an error to the end user and tell them to try again. And third and final would be fail to contact and suppress a response. And this is for folks that are very conscious of super message consumption, right? If the contact's going to be failed, I don't want to burn a super message actually sending out an error response to that end user. So just do nothing. All right, as previously stated, this is actually coming in the 227 release, which is the next upcoming release, and that is the addition of the standard status codes on the message contact deliveries route. Historically, we've always provided the raw status code and also the raw aggregator message. The problem was for multinational senders, all of these codes are different. They change when the aggregator changes them, and they didn't provide really any useful information. So we can't get rid of these just because we do have some customers who've built workarounds and or may have had pre-existing relationships with some aggregators, so they know what they mean. But we are appending the standard status code and then also the description on the standard status code to that deliveries route on the API. And so the deliveries route will actually return every leg in the message that an individual mobile number has went through. So if you want to programmatically pull back, delivery statuses for triggered sends that you're sending out in real time, this will be the way to do it. And it will also be universal regardless of where you're sending in the world. And then also the one thing I forgot to mention on those is if you remember back on the slide where I showed you the standard status codes, they go up in increments of 1,000. We intentionally left that much space in between them because as the carriers provide more granular information, we will start to augment those status codes to become more granular, and which will immediately be delivered to end users just because all the infrastructure here is now built out. All right, so some quick tips and tricks here. A lot of the questions we got as part of the webinar registration was a lot of them were around how do I create a send log and a data extension to store inbound responses from end users. And then some other ones were around how to actually set up a coupon code use case. I won't spend a ton of these times on here. With the, after the webinar, this deck will actually be sent out, so all this will be in here. But what these are some of the kind of key script variables you need to know about when you're setting up mobile messaging use cases. And if you're running any complex ones, these are essentially the values you need to know about in order to pull different text snippets off of SMS messages and to manipulate them. So won't run through them in detail, be more of an appendix here. But for logging MOs to a DE, so this is, you wanted to create a log of all inbound messages your customers send to you. A lot of customers do this only in that it allows them to see where the customers are falling down and maybe not understanding how to interact with their use case, because if a customer sends in something like a long form text string, you can actually write all that directly to a data extension. And so all that's happening here is essentially we're setting our variables. And then if I were to replace this DE name field with an actual name of a data extension I wanted to use as a log, every time an end user actually responded with an MO, I'd actually be able to register that in that data extension and create that running log. And the other one I won't go through in detail, but we do have kind of the outline steps here, is how to offer dynamic coupon codes via SMS. This uses the claim row function for AmpScript, but provided you have a set of coupon codes you do want to offer customers and you can get those into a data extension, this is the process by which you can actually dynamically claim those codes out of a data extension to ensure they're unique per message that's going out the door. And so we just do have the click-through fields here. Like I said, won't spend a ton of time here just because this is kind of a step-by-step process flow. So I won't walk you through it, but it will be part of the deck that all of you guys will receive in order to, how do you configure your DE, how do you configure your import, and then also the exact AmpScript you need to do in order to go ahead and actually start claiming those out of your data extension and getting them in your SMS messages. All right, so that being said, I think we should open it up to Q&A. So yeah, more than happy to answer any questions here, and I will just start to go through kind of line by line here and answer as many as I can before we run out of time. All right, and let's see, the how to preview SMS from a data extension is the first one that we've received. Let me actually go ahead and dive into the UI here. So within Journey Builder, if you're actually trying to do a live message preview, we do have a feature called Subscriber Preview. It's only via Content Builder today. However, it does allow you to go ahead and actually preview the personalization values that would be pulled out of any given data extension. And in this account, I should have enough data in here to actually go ahead and show this really quickly. So if I drag the SMS activity on Canvas, or you can actually get to this just going directly through Content Builder. And this is a QA account, so give it a second here. But if I were to create a new message, and the one thing I'll have to do is actually define my entry source before I go ahead and do this. Let me see, I want % mobile number. This subscriber preview feature here, and hopefully I have a data extension. I actually don't think I do for this account. Yeah, I don't have any in here. But if you were to go ahead and select a DE here, it would actually let you cycle through each individual row, so really each individual contact within that data extension, and see exactly how that AMP script would render and show up on the handset. All right, next question from Sasha. How do a chain of SMS messages within Journey Builder but ensure the message A is sent out before message B without using a wait activity? And so I'm assuming what the question here is, at least within Journey Builder, how do I actually chain messages together and ensure that one goes out before the other without a wait until? Right now in Journey Builder, that is not necessarily the use case that we would recommend. I'd actually be more interested to get some of the context on this question, as if you're trying to send multi-part messages in a market that doesn't support concatenation. Wait until would be probably the best way to try and achieve that use case. Once we make the update to the actual wait until SMS activity, though, you could either fire them off via an API event in order to handle the routing of the messages, and or that sounds like that's a market that we just need to get concatenation into. Need a little bit more context there, but I'll definitely follow up on the questions doc in order to dive a little bit deeper in there. And then how to create a preview of an SMS from a data extension. Once again here, if you are using subscriber preview and all of your message content is stored in a DE, if I were to actually have a data extension live in this account, I would be able to go through contact by contact, and so long as you were calling that field out of the data extension, it will show you the exact text rendering here in subscriber preview.
Kevin, you're looking at the conversation between me and Sasha. Do you think you could please jump down to the message received at 6:19? It's about SSJS validation.
Yep. All right. 6:19. All right. Is SSJS supported fully? We're able to use SSJS on response messages, but it seems like SSJS is not working. Is there more detailed error log for debugging of SMS messages with SSJS code? And so by SSJS specifically here, and Sasha, if you're still on, I would just post in the questions here, and or we'll take this one as a follow-up. But I think you're specifically referring to SSJS content blocks, which aren't formally supported by Mobile Connect, right? There's no barrier to actually getting them working, but OMM, or the send engine itself, doesn't account for those SSJS message blocks the same way it does typical AMP script blocks. Just for time's sake, I'd actually want to follow up with you specifically on this question, because I did see this one on the webinar invite itself, but I will need a little bit more context just so I don't misspeak right now. All right, next, if we have a Journey Builder with SMS activity and the SMS send is undelivered, expired, blocked, will the contact be stuck in the journey at the SMS activity? No, so regardless of what happens with the message status, that contact will still move through the journey. Once the send actually leaves our platform, that contact leaves our specific SMS journey activity and will continue down that path. Let's see.
Kevin, can we move on to the message received at the very last message, 6:46? They're saying if you opt out a contact in the Marketing Cloud, will that opt out transfer to the Salesforce platform?
So automatically no. When you actually go ahead and receive, when we receive a stop request, that is specific to the Marketing Cloud instance you're operating in. Typically the way that use case is run is one is when we say Salesforce, I'm assuming you're speaking on either core or more commonly when we see them is out of Service Cloud. If someone opts out of core or Service Cloud, the best practice right now is to initiate a QMO call off of that opt-out and actually have that also opt out user in Marketing Cloud. Vice versa, if you're using Marketing Cloud as that first entry point for an individual MO, it's actually best to put an HTTP post call in the message body that will call out to either Sales or Service Cloud. Because right now there's no native integration specifically around stop processing. That is something that has to be set up as part of an individual message. If you are trying to ensure that someone has opted out at both the core and the Service Cloud level or any other cloud you might happen to be using.
And then the next one right above that from Amit Sood.
Which message template should be used to log the log response D scenario? Text response template would be the best one there. Either text response and or it's actually usually best to put it on both text response and as the default keyword processor. It really depends on what exact use case that you want to run, right? If you just want to know everyone that interacted with a given keyword successfully, then it would be the text response template that's running that keyword. If you want to know everyone that made a mistake or everyone that made a typo or incorrectly interacted with your messaging program, you actually want to put that AMP script snippet within the default keyword responder itself. That way, every time someone misspells a keyword or thinks that your A2P messaging program has a live agent sitting on the other end, you'll actually get that full long form response in that data extension itself. Let's see, from what I read, the send step occurs in the blackout window. SMS will never be sent, i.e. won't queue, and the send when the blackout window opens. Sorry, should have been more clear. So for this question specifically, and this is actually a really good one, is there are technically 3 blackout windows within the system, which is always fun for me, the PM, to try and wrap my head around. The first one is the one that lives in the administration screen on the channel app. That blackout window, provided that you do have expiration enforced, will not reschedule a message whatsoever. So if you have a blackout window at 9 p.m., it's operating off of your account's time zone. So whatever time zone your account is set to, it'll be 9 p.m. that time. That will expire and completely kill messages in the queue. Subsequently, Journey Builder has a custom blackout window and once again operates off of account time zone. That will completely prevent that SMS send from being deployed from that journey for the given contact or any contacts that pass through that SMS activity within the blackout window period. The third one, the one I think you're referring to, is the blackout window on the API, which you actually set via UTC parameters. What that one does is it will black out a end user's, it will black out a message. So during that UTC period, let's say 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., which is the most common one, and it will actually go ahead right now and reschedule that message for 1 second after the blackout period is ending. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see, we just covered the stop one. And yeah, Sora, so I think I'm reading part of your conversation here.
It looks like, Kevin, this is Gilda. It looks like we've covered all of our questions. I don't think we've received any additional questions, but it looks like we've covered all of our questions. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
I think that's it for today. I know Gilda and I have been talking about doing kind of a part 2 session. If we do, we'll get pretty deep into next keyword. I know there's a lot of challenges around next keyword. I guess the only other thing I forgot to mention on some of the forward-facing stuff is for folks that are familiar with two-way use cases, you've probably uncovered the concept of conversation window in our platform at some point. These are particularly when customers want their double opt-ins to work for more than 24 hours, more than an hour. Typically, when a conversation is opened, and that actually occurs when the user on a double opt-in flow text and join, a 60-minute window is opened, and that's how long the customer has to respond with yes. That's adjustable by support or by my dev team. We are actually exposing that control to customers and also doing some rewiring because we ran into some issues in Brazil, particularly when the conversation window was different on the code in the keyword level. So we're actually going to be exposing that control on a keyword by keyword basis in the administration screen. So If I'm actually, I still have the app up, don't I? The exact place it will be located. And timelines TBD. I'm hoping to get it into micro release in the 227 timeframe, which will be next release. If not, it will be in the 228 one, which is coming near August. But specifically, what I'm talking about is if I go into my keyword management here, we're actually adding a new column here that will be conversation window. You'll be able to click on that conversation window and then adjust it up to a maximum of 7 days. And so that will have impact on how long your double opt-in will listen for a confirmation response for, but then also how long your next keyword use cases will be valid for, right? How long we'll actually listen for a response from end users before we close off that conversation and put that end user back into a default state. And other than that, Sasha, just with the SSJS questions, well, I'll actually probably follow up with you specifically. I just need to get some more context on exactly what you're asking, and then also just while I was presenting, I couldn't read through the conversation here. But I will follow up just so I know specifically what you're asking, and we can get you a correct answer.
And I could reach out to the attendee that asked the server-side JavaScript question and put the two of you in contact.
Yep,
so thank you, everyone. So thank you, everyone, for joining. We appreciate you being here. We will definitely send the recording to the webinar and link to the documents that were highlighted today. And as Kevin mentioned, we are in discussion of having a part 3 because this was a lot of information, but great information. I know I learned a ton of stuff around SMS. So Kevin, thank you so very much for doing this. We really appreciate it, and have a good evening, everyone.